evening, everyone. This is Community Conversation with Mayor Girtz, and I am very lucky today because my guest is Abby Holbrook, who is you are a licensed clinical social worker. Is that correct, Abby?
That's right. That's
All right.
correct.
And I have lifelong tried to distinguish my various therapeutic professions from one another. And so just for the benefit of those who are listening, how is that different from a licensed clinical social worker or a psychiatrist who might be a medical professional?
So there's several paths to being able to become a licensed therapist. There are several master's level clinicians. The social worker has the MSW, so I'm the licensed clinical social worker. There are licensed professional counselors, licensed marriage and family therapists. All of us tend to have a 2-year degree. And then we've completed a certain number of hours of supervision before we can then go into private practice and see clients and bill insurance. There's also then licensed psychologists who have 4 years and even longer. They have a PhD, and they can do certain types of testing that those of us with a master's level license are not able to do. And then psychiatrists are MDs. So they used to, and they still do counseling, but they really are providers with the in-depth knowledge of the pharmacology. So,
great.
And it takes all of us.
Yes, no, and trust me, I understand that, and that is the reason we're here today. As I told Abby prior to the formal start of the show, the care of our heads and our hearts here in Athens has been on my mind. And so I was able to snag a friend who I've known for a long time,
absolutely,
who could not refuse this offer. and really, you know, I'm somebody who personally and in terms of contact with my immediate family members has had some level of experience with so many of the care or self-care or self-medicational opportunities out there. Talk therapy I've done many times in my life. A lot of family members who have received some pharmacological support. Certainly I'm familiar with the self-medication. You know, the exercise, the reading, the walking. I was out for a walk this morning, just trying to keep my head on.
It feels great. Yeah,
it is great. I am so glad we are actually in autumn, at least for the for the individual experience of being out there. And so, Abby, all the time, life is kind of crazy, and so I think you layer this particular year on top of that, and it's especially crazy.
Yes.
And so I really appreciate you giving some time to the people of Athens today and just talking through some of the things that we would be best served by being conscious of as we make it through this time. And I want to begin just asking a little bit about your own background and talking a little bit about that. You grew up in Athens. And I'm always interested, particularly on this program and informal conversations, talking to people who are now in adulthood about their perspective. You know, now you as a parent of a couple of kids, having grown up here and reflecting on the specific nature of what Athens is, first as a kid, but now as a parent. So, you know, as you think back at your life at Clarke Central and now thinking, God, you know, you've got kids going into their teens.
Yes.
What comes to mind for you?
Well, so Athens has always been a unique town, right? I loved growing up here. I loved being a kid here. I loved it, even with all the challenges growing up and going to public school here, Barrow, Clarke Middle, Clarke Central. Yes, my daughter is in 9th grade virtual school at Clarke Central. I did go away for about 6 years for college and then I did decide to come back here for graduate school. There are some townies or folks who've moved away and come back that will tell you Athens has a pull. You know, I think it holds a lot of the best things that represent the South. and it has a rich culture and a rich community. And that, along with family, pulled me back here. So I went to graduate school and then have navigated adult life here. And I feel like was able to make that transition from being kid and teenager then to creating an adult life in this town. I certainly still have friends, really great friends that I grew up with here, but then becoming involved in the community through work, through community groups. We've been on some boards together. And also getting my own kids back into public school here, I was very committed to doing. Have just been able to transition into that adult life here, and I love it.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
I often reflect on what my life's journey would have been like if I had stayed in Norfolk, Virginia, where I grew up.
Yeah.
Looking at those same streets decade after decade and having the sort of proximity of experience that you have with friends when you live in the same town.
Yeah.
Versus having moved away and now I've been in Athens 25 years. So this is my hometown now. And so it's always interesting for me to talk to you and, Shane Jordan McBride and other friends of mine.
Oh, yes.
Who grew up here, Robert Sampson, who went through Clarke Central around the same time and now have made an adult life here. So you did go away, went to undergrad at James Madison, Virginia.
It was actually Roanoke College.
Oh, Roanoke College. Okay.
Yes.
So
very close.
Very close. So was it a foregone conclusion that you would come back to Athens, or was there a point where you had to say, all right, there's a fork in the road here? And
yes. So I knew that I wanted to go and get my MSW, and I looked at several universities and got into several. But I have always been close to my family, and I've always loved this town. And so once I got into UGA, it was pretty clear that I was going to come back. At least for a time, not fully realizing I would come back and decide to stay. But
yeah. And I think you and I met when you were supporting people who were in cancer treatment.
Yes.
As a social worker. I was on the initial board of the Northeast Georgia Cancer Foundation that's done fabulous work and has the sort of signature event that's the triathlon at Sandy Creek Park every year.
Yes.
And of course, we're sad that things are not proceeding with events like that right now.
Yeah.
I was thinking about your professional life then over a decade ago when we met, and then now, dealing with cancer is tough. It's tough for the individual. It's tough for the family. It's tough for the neighborhood. Do you see some parallels between that work and, working with people here in 2020 amidst the pandemic and racial reckoning and some of these other things that have been on our minds and hearts?
Yes. So I think that, so I worked in cancer care for 10 years at Northeast Georgia Cancer Care. Well, gosh, it's gone through several names now, University Cancer and Blood. There are so many experiences of uncertainty and of, at times, I think, feelings of helplessness, and at times skating into feelings of hopelessness that families and individuals that I worked with would brush up against. But what was so amazing was watching people journey through that and come back to their place of, okay, this is what I'm dealing with right now. There are things that are out of my control, but there are things that I can control, and there are things that I can do to take good care of myself, my mind and heart and my body, and to keep moving forward. And I think with a lot of what's been going on with COVID and also in the news, it can be easy for people to operate from a place of powerlessness sometimes and uncertainty because it feels so big and there feels like so much. But my sense is that there are things that we can do both in our community, but also internally to navigate all of that in a way that really keeps us in a place that's more empowered, that's more forward moving. And that takes some work, right? And that takes some mobilizing of resources, just like it did in cancer care. So absolutely, I think there's parallels.
Well, thinking about that desire to be resilient, as individuals and as a community, as you think about not only the clients who you support as a professional, but just your observation of the community, what do you observe as some of the key things that we really all ought to be doing right now to keep ourselves emotionally and mentally healthy? Are there just some baselines where you're like, if you're doing 3 or 4 of these things, you've probably got your head above water?
Absolutely. And I think what's so interesting right now for me and for other therapists is that, yes, we are helping clients, but we're also living this also. So not only are these things I'm seeing that can, these are things that can be helpful for clients in the community, but these are things that I'm having to do, that we're all having to do so that we can stay present with our lives and not fall into those spaces of just, being very despairing or stuck. So I was trying to think of some of the key themes because life has been so altered for so many people. And we've had to adjust to doing life in so many different ways. I think something that's really important, even though it's not going to be the same all the time and we can't be rigid about it, is we need some sort of flexible structure to our day. Even if we're working from home or, kids are doing Zoom school, we need some level of structure. Another piece that is so potent, and I see it in so many clients, because there is so much going on politically, in the news with Black Lives Matter protests, with COVID, with just natural disasters, right? We are faced with so much information right now, 24 hours a day. And we can often fall into a place where we have this idea that we have to, or we owe it to our community, our world, to bear witness. Yes, okay, I understand that. I think we do need to know what's happening. But the bearing witness 24 hours a day is not healthy or helpful. I truly think as humans, we're not designed to take in that level of information. So I advise people, and I do this for myself, yes, take some time to look in on what's going on, but then we need to back away from that, right? We need to engage with our friends and family, how we feel is appropriate right now. And we need to engage with hobbies and work and things like that. So getting some space.
It's helpful to hear. I found myself, who has to be conscious of what's going on in state and national policy making for this job, like ever more a media junkie. And when I get up in the morning and look at the Atlanta Journal and the Athens Banner Herald and the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, it can feel sometimes like I'm on this endless loop. And if I haven't looked at the news in 20 minutes, I'm like, what the hell have I missed?
Yes.
And I have found myself maybe not gravitating toward like longer form writing, which I enjoy. I like reading a whole lot, but it's almost
like move your body. Remember to eat, right? Remember to look to your left and your right in your own community when it can be so easy to get caught up in what's going on in the world. I think that helps you remember what's really good in people, and, what are things you can do on a very local level that you feel like you can have some power over. Because I think that's really important.
That exercising and eating, sort of plays into that theme of of having some level of structure. I
Yes.
sit here in the office sometimes and I'm like, God, why am I such an ass today? And I'm like, oh, because I've only consumed coffee since I woke up at 5:30 and it's 1 in the
Yes.
afternoon. Maybe
Yes.
that's why.
Yes. Have I been sitting watching Netflix all day? Yeah. No, absolutely. I think when stress is really high and it's chronic, we can get exhausted both mentally and physically, and it can be easy, like a phrase I use a fair amount is, it can be easy to throw our hands off the reins of our brain or even our activities. And we forget to mobilize our own tools. But what I find is that when I do that, or when my clients say, okay, I did go and do this, they do recognize that they feel better. And there is power there, right? Where we need to feel like we have some power. There's less helplessness.
Not giving way to just that free fall.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, that's great. I've noticed some interesting things in this year. We're having this conversation online. I would prefer to be having this conversation in a room with you where I could pour you another cup of coffee. Do you notice some things about relational fraying or fragmentation around not interacting live in person with people as much? Is that a phenomenon you're finding?
That's a great question. And it also relates to another piece that I think is so important during this time, is that even though we have some guidelines or some ideas about how we need to stay safe during this time or to keep the community safe, we absolutely need to be connected, right? And we need to evaluate risk in a way that allows us to not be so isolated. One thing that has been really interesting that I have found about, because I do this all day long, right? As therapists, we all worried, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to pick up on body language. I'm not going to be able to connect with my clients. I'm not going to be able to pick up on, the energy, right?
The subtleties that you get when you're in a room with somebody.
Yes. But what I have found is that not that I value, Zoom therapy or teletherapy over face to face, but I have found during this unique time, there's a level of therapeutic intimacy that I think is different in a way. And part of that is because people are now inviting me into their homes. They're in my home. They know that I'm sitting on my couch or even sitting on my bed sometimes, right? They get to show me things that are important to them in their home. Some clients, I think, just feel more comfortable there. So what I encourage folks to do, not just in relationship to a meeting or to therapy, but that connecting with friends and family this way is absolutely valid and it's necessary. And you can get some of that real connection that we worry that we're missing. The worst thing that happens in teletherapy is when the internet gets glitchy, right? That limits connection. But if that's solid, I think a lot of my therapist friends will agree. We are still connecting with people. So I would never want that to be a deterrent for somebody who needs help for reaching out for that.
That's helpful. It's funny. I've had and observed a couple of things in recent days. So just before I came to the office, my wife was on a video call with her dad, who lives in South Georgia.
Yeah.
And she ordered her dad a video monitor. He's in his mid 80s, and so not tech savvy, but she wanted to make sure to have that connection. And it was great to watch them talk because I could see a level of connection in their conversation that seemed, to use your word, more intimate than just in a phone conversation.
Yes.
And for myself, even in my professional life, in that part of my life, I've been on calls with about a dozen mayors every couple of weeks, and in some ways, it is like a group therapy session. We're downloading around all the things that we're dealing with and handling, and sharing advice. And I always come away from that hour feeling lifted,
Yeah.
in a way that I didn't feel, before the conversation
Mm-hmm.
began. I will say
That's
also,
great.
maybe 2 months ago, well, two things, and I'll hit these one at a time. One is that I did start meeting with residents in person, outdoors
Mm-hmm.
in a distanced way.
Mm-hmm.
So we're sitting 12 feet apart behind Mama's Boy, in the park. Epidemiologists are just telling us that's 20 times safer than being indoors with other people, and
Yes.
and I have found a goodness in that,
Yes.
and a benefit in that. And just as a human being, I would encourage other people to say, sort of in the way that you just described, if you can mitigate the risk in some way, have that meeting outdoors.
Yes. So I appreciate you bringing that up because one of the ways that I think it's been hard a little bit for us as therapists is knowing that the things that benefit us truly the most as humans, connecting, touching, being together in community, being at concerts. I know you and I miss those, right?
Big time.
Huge loss for me.
Yeah. I've got tickets for shows that I hope will happen
I do
someday.
too.
Nick Cave, come back to Atlanta, please.
I have like 8 tickets. But when I think we are stay in a very black and white or rigid space about connecting in person, I have seen some real detriment to mental health. But what I have to be careful about is not going against science and what science is saying about what's helpful for the community, but how do we mitigate risks? How do we assess risk in a way that is still taking all that into account, but also allowing you to engage some in person? Wearing masks, sitting apart, like you're describing, because I do think that that's necessary. I think that staying completely isolated and away from people is also potentially life threatening. And so that's been a big path to navigate. But I appreciate you saying that about connecting in person.
Yeah. The other phenomenon that, I guess has been growing for over a decade now, but at least from my experience, sort of reached this breaking point this year, is use of social media.
Yeah.
So I've backed off dramatically. There was a point 5 years ago where I was on Facebook every day, having lengthy conversations, sometimes public conversations.
Yes.
And between just being very busy, particularly leading up to, say, early July. I mean, for me, working lots of 12 and 15-hour days in the office.
Oh, yeah.
Just, barely hanging on to email and phone calls and the like, having to let that go. But then also sort of this growing realization that, like, geez, it's just like a big dumpster fire out there. And am I intellectually or emotionally benefiting myself from being out here a whole bunch? Have you found this a phenomenon kind of in your personal life or working with clients?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you're bringing up the hard stuff that I think we all have to look at. So social media is another space that we absolutely have to question what we see. And I also think before we post.
You mean it might be possible to have a thought that you don't type into a social media platform? Is that possible, Abby?
It might be. And I truly think of this on all sides of a lot of issues, right? Because what we share out there, when we're interacting with our friends who are also dealing with a lot of stress, it can be generating even more stress and anxiety for them. So when I'm talking to clients or myself, what I often, there are things on social media that truly just have become white noise to me. I just don't engage with them because I ask this question. If I decide to have that conversation or engage with someone, and it's, and we are on opposing sides of something, am I truly going to change anybody's mind? What is this doing to me? Is this ultimately helpful for the national or the world conversation, right? And if the answer is no, then my encouragement is that you find another way to engage on the issues that are important to you. And I want to be clear, I'm never saying put it in a black and white space of, oh, I've just turned my head away and I've moved off to the hills. But we have to find a way to moderate it so we can have staying power in our lives and, so that we can keep a baseline healthy mental health. Because it can be consuming for people.
Absolutely. No, and I've observed there's sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy kind of phenomenon on social media where it just becomes like a, you could look at it as people talking into the mirror.
Yes.
Or almost like a circular firing squad, like we're just beating the hell out of each other. To what end?
I think that's what you just said is something that's really come to light for me since March. There is so much beating up of people that's going on, right, across the board. But even, whether it's political side or a stance on any issue, I don't know how helpful or effective that is, right? It just, and it to me creates even more perception of division when, like I said earlier, if we pull back a little bit, question that, but look to our left and right and around us in our community, what I see are people trying to do the best they can to figure out life and to figure out what's the best path forward. So I guess in a lot of ways, get offline and what's happening actually in the world around you can be helpful to sort of ground back into, we will get through this. We don't have to beat each other up. We can have respectful conversations about things.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, you and I are both people who are fervent in our political beliefs.
Yes.
But what I hear you saying is that doesn't have to be to the exclusion of recognizing other people's humanity, even if they just disagree like dramatically about some things.
Yes. And you just said the word humanity. Seeing another person's humanity is exactly a thought I had this morning, that it is so easy to view people almost as inhuman, right? On all sides of every issue. But the reality is that the only way forward for our country, for our world, is to recognize each other's humanity and to be willing to respectfully talk through what's going on to find really the areas we agree and to be able to move forward. But I don't know that I've ever seen so much division in my lifetime, right? But absolutely, if we can focus on the humanity of people, to me, that breeds compassion, right? And empathy.
Which we need a lot of.
We do. I think people are really being called right now in so many levels to question their own sense of who they are, of what they believe. And that's hard. And beating each other up on the internet about it is never going to make somebody question that or look at themselves, I don't know. There's my soapbox.
No, I think that's helpful. I think it is. Sort of moving that exact question. So engagement with each other, kind of to the youth realm. You and I have kids. I worked
Mm-hmm.
with kids in this town for more
Yeah.
than 20 years. I mean,
Yes.
I will note maybe a little piece of comedy. You know, I think adults sometimes point the finger at kids and they're like, oh, if those kids would just behave out there. And of course, I see adults probably behaving more poorly on social media than I do children.
Yes.
But that little soliloquy aside, um, do you give some advice to your own kids or to parents around their kids around online activity?
Um, well, absolutely. Uh, one of the things I think that's been big with my two lately is, when they are online is, we have to develop this ability to think critically about information that we're encountering or things that people are saying online. And so, in a lot of ways, I teach them to question everything, even sometimes to question me, right? Uh, you know, Absolutely to question me. But because when you question, then you can begin to discern, okay, wait a minute. You question, and then if you don't know something, then you go ask more questions. And that's how we grow in critical thinking and in really coming to recognize what it is that we value, what's important, and not, just taking in what we're being told. So there are a couple of times, both kids during this time, they've come to me about some of the things going on in the world, in the news about COVID, around Black Lives Matter protests. And they've had questions. And so I say we've actually got to look at that and not just take what we're hearing and look at multiple sources around that, right? So to get the most accurate information. I don't know if that answers your question, but
No,
that's
no,
kind of what's come
that's
up for me
helpful.
with mine lately. Yeah.
And thinking about parenting, so this has been a
Yeah.
crazy time to be a parent. I mean, parenting is kind of a crazy endeavor all around, I think. And you even hit on,
Yeah.
what might be a generational change for you and I versus maybe, earlier generations, which is kind of this ability to question our own stuff and maybe even ask our kids to question our own stuff. My parents didn't
Yes.
ask me to think critically about what they were saying to me in 1975 or 1978
Absolutely.
in the way that, yep, I don't mind Noah calling me out sometimes. And I'm not
Yes.
always perfect about this, but I try and sometimes say, you're right. Daddy didn't do that
Yeah.
well. Should think
Yes.
through this. You made a good observation. Thank you. Um, but I think for parents now who are conscious of what we're doing well, what we're doing poorly, what kind of seeds we're planting, what kind
Yeah.
of bruises we may be creating emotionally, and hoping that those bruises heal. What would you say to people as they try and navigate 2020 as a parent around all these things? I mean, we've had conversations in my house with Noah around being Black in America, around the difficulty of not being able to spend time with friends in big groups. I mean, the same stuff we're dealing with as adults, but obviously, hits young people really hard.
Yes. So I want to make sure I sort of address, and you tell me if I don't address what you're asking. So yes, I do think that there are some generational differences in allowing our children to question even us at times, respectfully. Um, One thing that I want to say about kids right now that has really kind of amazed me is that they, in some ways, have seemed to handle this pandemic and all of that sometimes better than some of the adults that I've seen, right? They've kind of rolled with things. So, having some real conversations with them around what's going on, being honest with them at their level of understanding about why we're having to do these things, but allowing them to question some of those things. At one point, a couple of months in, even my son was like, and I think they were even more isolated than we were. He said, I can't keep doing this, right? So he was upset. And so we had to navigate, how do we help him find some friends in the bubble, right? That we can spend some time with so he can have engagement, to help balance that sense of what do we need to do for the community with how do we need to actually help our children with their mental and emotional health, right? So I've had to talk to some clients about that. How do you help them get some of that contact that they need in a way that's safe? I have absolutely, I talk to the kids about everything that has gone on with Black Lives Matter protests and what it does mean to be Black in America. I think that, Black parents don't have the option of not talking with their children about those kinds of things. So I think all children in the community can handle hearing about that and understanding why these things are going on and what life is like for a lot of people. I think that only you can talk to them at appropriate age levels, but I think that only enhances their empathy and their understanding of the lives of others, who are different. So I'm not sure if that hits on, but talking to them, being honest, letting them ask questions, helping them navigate through sort of black and white thinking, right? Dichotomous thinking, starting early.
Mm-hmm. In the same way we talk to kids about sexuality differently when they're 8 versus when they're 16.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm not a child therapy expert, by the way. I work with kids 18 and older, but we got some great therapists in town that work with kids. But
I know
I'm doing the best I can with mine.
What are some of the things that, as we talk to ourselves as parents, that we should be conscious of? Not thinking about talking to our kids, but talking to ourselves. Reflecting on our parenting abilities or perceived lack thereof.
Oh, and especially during 2020,
Yeah.
right? I think one of the things that I see a lot of in parents is even if people aren't consciously attempting to be perfect, but there is some effort to do everything just so. I think that number one, we just need to throw that out the window. We are not going to be perfect, but I can't remember who coined this phrase, but years ago when I was raising the littles, I came across a phrase of good enough parenting, right? And that means being engaged with them, talking to them, making sure they know you're there for them, being as consistent as possible. But we don't have to create perfect lives for them in perfect scenarios, right?
Mm.
No one is going to look back on 2020 and say, oh man, I can't believe I let my kids watch that much TV or do that. We are all doing the best we can to get through this year where there are so many challenges and limitations to what we can do. So I am always about giving parents a break, right? And if they feel like their stress has gotten to a point where they are not effectively able to engage with their children or parent, then you've got to get some support and help for yourself, right? Whether it be therapy or you spend time with a friend. But really, it's how do we take pressure off? Do the best we can, reach out for support with friends and family, but know that there's no perfect guideline out there right now.
Well, and you just hit on what will be the second to last thing that I want to talk about, and that is a question that comes up in the course of any year, but is particularly pertinent now, which is, when does somebody know now's a time to kind of reach beyond
Okay.
having a structured life, setting up a good diet, exercising well, and reaching out for some professional support? Like when do the scales tip for, for any of us as an adult to say, I need some help with this?
Yeah. What are the clues? Yeah. And I think what's interesting around that is it can be different for every person, right? But when you find yourself dipping into spaces of, I feel emotionally and physically fatigued all the time. Motivation is dropping off. I'm having so much difficulty engaging with my work, engaging with my life. Um, when issues of sleep come in, I'm sleeping too much or too little. Uh, when perhaps there are issues around eating, I can't, whether it's I'm eating so much or I'm just not eating, I'm losing an appetite. But honestly, one of the most important questions is: am I feeling extremely depressed? Am I depressed? Am I anxious? And am I? How much of my day is this permeating? And if it's, I'm not going to give a percentage there, but if you are really struggling to put, I think people feel like they have to be struggling so hard to put one foot in front of the other. But that's what I want people to understand: is it doesn't have to be to that point. But if you see yourself creeping towards that, where you're feeling kind of hopeless, you're feeling helpless, where despair about what's happening in the world begins to be the permeating thought,
Mm-hmm.
when you're having trouble shifting your own beliefs in that, then getting some support is helpful. Um, and most definitely, if you're having thoughts of, blatant suicidal thinking, of active thinking. But what people also don't realize is that even the thoughts of, I just can't deal with this anymore. What if I just weren't here? That very passive way of thinking about our lives is also a real sign that we need to reach out. It, Another big piece that I've noticed in some clients that can cross over into anxiety as well as depression, is if you're starting to have real, what I call ruminative thinking. I call it my hamster wheel. If that starts spinning in a way that I feel like my brain has almost been hijacked. That's a word, as if I don't have power over that anymore.
That same wave of persistent thoughts.
Persistent and pervasive thought, that's exhausting mentally and emotionally. Whether that be depressive thoughts or anxious thoughts, we may need some help, whether that be talking to a therapist or reaching out to your primary provider to talk about options. Whether it be medication or, again, getting into therapy, or both.
Yeah, no, and I've certainly observed that, kind of on a sliding scale, people in my life have needed one or both at various points.
Yes, absolutely. I have been to therapy. I am in therapy. I think every therapist would benefit from that. So absolutely, it is an option that's out there. One thing I want to say is there are more people reaching out for therapy, so it can take a little time to get in with someone.
Mm-hmm.
Please do not let that be a deterrent. It doesn't mean that the therapists in the community don't want to help, but we need more therapists. Continue to put yourself out there, in reaching out to therapists.
Great, Abby. I appreciate you talking people through that. And I would ask any of our viewers or listeners that if you're at that point, as you described, if you're on that continuum, get some help.
Yes.
It makes life better to get outside just the confines of your own skull sometimes.
Yes. And I think we learn so much more about who we are when we can bounce what we are dealing with off of another person.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, listen, there's one more thing I want to close with.
Yes.
You mentioned that you had something like 8 sets of concert tickets coming up. I was in a conversation with my great friend Peyton Bradford, who is a musician, now an attorney, but still plays some, and who I've spent a lot of nights with on sticky floors in this town and in many other towns. And we were both agreeing that post-COVID, we are just going to spend about 500 consecutive nights listening to music.
Absolutely.
And that was the way it was going to be. So what are 2 or 3 of the artists who you cannot wait to see when we make it through this particular era?
Okay. Wow. So I will say that the 2 folks.
And no judgment. No.
It's so hard for me. Like when it's sort of a favorite or you have to narrow it down questions asked, it's always hard. So
you can name 10. Up to you.
Before COVID closed the gates, the last show I saw was Sturgill Simpson and Tyler Childers. So I was supposed to see Tyler and Jason Isbell out in Montana in July. So honestly, and Tyler is my favorite redheaded songwriter out there, and he just presented some really important songs and messages in our community. But he would be first on my list is Tyler Childers. Interestingly enough, and you're gonna laugh, I had tickets to go see with a good friend, Primus. So I'm all over the place. So I really want to get to that show. I've never experienced anything like that.
Saw him a couple times in the early 90s. I'll tell you some stories after this.
Okay. So I was supposed to see that. And then also my songwriter who's gotten me through also is Cody Jinks. I was supposed to see him in Augusta and I missed him. So those 3 things I'm looking forward to when I can get back out there.
All right, Tyler, Cody, just know dollars are coming your way. The Holbrook Cash Machine will be supporting you in your artistic lives.
Can I say one thing?
Please.
I just want to say thank you. I have known you for a long time, and I was very proud to be able to vote for you. I can truly say that you are an Athenian. You've been here 25 years. You truly care about this community and the kids in this community and the adults and the musicians. And so I just want to say thank you for the work you've done.
Thanks, Abby.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. We're all hanging on to each other.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I can't thank you enough for joining us, and look forward to when I do see you in the flesh, but reach out otherwise. I like to say I'm easy to find.
Will do. I'll see you on the floor of the Georgia Theater soon.
We're going to be there. Thanks, my friend.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.